Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Joyce Chet, and welcome to Our Beloved Church. This is a podcast where we are trying to share about subject matter that we're all going through. We're seeing as current events, and we would like to look through the lens of the Bible and as people who are looking forward to the soon coming of Christ. And so today I want to welcome back my friends Natalie and Davy, David Garcia, and we're going to be talking about a subject that a lot of people are upset about, and that is the subject of immigration. Natalie brought this up, and so maybe Natalie, you can share a little bit about why you're so interested in this subject.
We live close to Portland, Oregon, and I work in Portland, Oregon. And I was checking the news a couple of weeks ago, and I saw that President Trump was sending troops to Portland and called the city a war ravaged or war torn city in need of intervention, federal intervention. And I thought, oh, how strange. I work in Portland. I work close to the area he's mentioning, and I don't see this as being an issue. So I started investigating the issue. And of course, I've known for some time that immigration for years has been um, escalating in the public consciousness as an issue that is needing intervention, federal intervention. And so I thought I'd do some research on that, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that.
That's that's interesting because yeah, when you told me about that, I was really surprised too because as somebody who works in the Portland area, I wasn't aware of some of these social issues that were happening specifically for Portland. And so this is something that you're helping me to learn more about. And Davy just has an interest. It seems like you have your finger on the pulse of a lot of things, and so we thought you'd be somebody who would be able to give us some good feedback on this as well.
Yeah, I think everyone either has a strong opinion about it or they know someone who has a very strong opinion about it. And it's just one of those real hot button issues that rolls around through the culture every now and then. Sometimes it's abortion, sometimes it's gay marriage, sometimes it's transgenderism in schools, and sometimes it's immigration. And right now it's immigration. It's one of those things that's really hot, really divisive, really on everyone's minds. It's always in the news. And, I think that that's very much on purpose. I don't think these things are as organic as they seem at first glance. I think these things are done on purpose to divide us. And so I'm interested in those things. And I think it's kind of funny what Natalie said about Portland, how, they're sending troops there and they tell you this is a war-torn city that's full of violence, because I hear stories all the time about how there's like all these protests and demonstrations and they're ramming into ICE vehicles and they're protesting and causing violence at these detention facilities. And that's happening in Chicago, it's happening in LA. And I hear about that stuff all the time, and I guess you just kind of assume it's true. And yeah, when you talk to people that actually live there, it's often not nearly, what they say it is, which makes you wonder, like how real a lot of these things are that they put out in the news and the things that they feed to us. So, it's one of those things that you hear about, and I think it's being used as a point to really cause a lot of hatred and foment hatred and division in people. So it's something I think we should pay attention to. I think it's something that we should illuminate and know more about, and we should know as Christians how to move forward with topics like these.
Yeah, and so before we proceed, I do want to let people know that we are not people who align with any particular party. We're not
Mhm.
into partisanship or anything like that. We are seekers of truth. I think first and foremost, people should understand that. And we really want, at the end of this, what we're really hoping for is that we can have a conversation about something, that we can bring down the temperature of things so
Hmm.
that people can understand, how am I responding to this? And is it in such a way that God's will is being done? Or am I playing into someone else's hands who's trying to manipulate me? And so to do that, I thought we should look at it from a multidimensional way of thinking. And we had shared on another podcast about first dimension, second dimension, third dimension of thinking. First dimension is just looking at the the first level of where people are, what people are arguing about. And so the second dimension would be to draw some kind of conclusion from this, looking at motives, bringing some more judgment and insight based upon more understanding of the situation. And then the third dimension would be to look at the spiritual aspect, the great controversy, and as Seventh-day Adventists, for us to look at what is my role as a Seventh-day Adventist in looking at this. How should I respond? And so let's look at the first level of this. What are people really, really caught up with, the emotions of, what are the topics here for immigration?
Well, there's a lot of because people tend to look at this as purely a partisan and a political issue because people see the effects of it and they often look at it in they have kind of tunnel vision on the effects of what's going on depending on what your temperament is and what your political party is. So if you're a Democrat or you consider yourself to be more of a liberal type of person, then you're going to be seeing the ICE raids. You're going to be seeing the government sending troops into cities. You're going to be seeing families being torn apart. You're going to be seeing, violence happening on the border. You're going to be seeing these things and you're going to react to that. And you're going to see the evils in that and those things. And then if you're a conservative or you consider yourself a Republican in the United States, then you're going to be more concerned with, oh, well, there's lawlessness. Are the people in our nation are being displaced by people from other nations? If we don't have a home for ourselves, and where are we supposed to live? You're going to see, you're going to focus on things like, well, these people are mostly on welfare, and then we have to pay for them. And what obligation do we have to people from another country? This country should serve our people first. And you're going to be concerned about, drugs and crime and things like this. So, depending on what your temperament is and your political position, you're going to really tunnel vision on one thing and you're going to start to other
Yes.
the opposing side and you're going to start to view them in sometimes you won't even view them as normal human beings anymore. They're just kind of your enemies. They're others and they're people who are out to get you, and then this causes a lot of hatred and division, and we see the intensity of that both online and in real life as well.
So, along those lines, something that I noticed is that there were people that I felt that I was on the same page with during the last 5 years. I felt like these people understood the principles of religious liberty, understood the principles of Protestantism, and this kind of thing. But then I found that as we are now moving forward into now this issue with immigration and this kind of thing, when certain subjects are brought up that I think touch upon these principles, and I would think that they would respond a certain way, that because they are so tied to their political party, it's almost as if they have to defend that political party and they have to make it right. They have to make it so that that political party looks right. And it's a little it's surprising. It's very disorienting. And I'm seeing that I went through the last 5 years with a small group of people, right? Because my group of people who looked at me and thought that my decisions were noble and that I had a good character, right? Because during the last 5 years, people thought I didn't have a good character if I didn't make certain health decisions. Like now, this group is getting smaller and smaller because now I see this group of people making decisions that I'm not sure, are they based really truly upon principle or are they based upon party lines? I'm just being honest and frank because when you're talking about Democrats versus Republicans, that's what I see being played out. I saw it also in the last 5 years because the subject of jabs used to be different. There were between Republicans and Democrats, they felt differently about jabs. And then as those 5 years progressed, all of a sudden, what the different parties felt about the jabs became different, like it switched or something. And then you saw people making decisions again based on party lines versus principles. And so I don't know if I explained it that well or clearly. Did that make sense at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think that people overly politicize everything, especially in the United States. We live in such a country where everything becomes political, and there's always an Overton window that's always shifting. There's always an allowed confines of discussion, right? You can have as much discussion as you want as long as it falls within these bounds. And anything that falls outside of these bounds, immediately you're going to be ostracized. Maybe you'll be thrown off of social media or lose your job or whatever. It has to be really, really, it has to fit inside of these tight confines of allowed conversation. And we see that all sorts of things. We saw that during COVID. We see that now during immigration. You see that for most things.
Natalie, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think I agree with both of you. I think that's a good summary of events.
Okay, so we have touched upon here like the first level of thinking as far as this immigration subject. We see the country being split. We see people being very upset with each other about subjects that have a lot of truth to them. There is a lot of injustice happening on both sides. There is this issue of concern of crime, what to do about illegals. Should the borders be open? Certainly not. We should have order and that type
Mhm.
of thing. And so what is the solution? We're moving towards that, but as we do so, let's go to the second level of thinking on this, the second dimension of this, which has to do with questions like why would this be happening? Who would be behind this? And how are our minds being perhaps manipulated to be thinking? Anyone have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I think Natalie would do a really good job at really illuminating this. But before she does, I think I just want to expand just a little bit on having trying to have some compassion whenever you see people argue on these different sides, because it's really easy to get angry. Especially if you're more on one side than the other, if you're more of a have a liberal temperament or a conservative temperament,
Right.
it's very easy to have compassion and understanding and join the tribe of you people who think more like you, and then to not understand and get angry and to really other the people who view it the other way, because they both sides, both sides can be extreme and crazy and violent and insane for sure, and they often are. But there are people who make good points on either side, and you can understand why somebody would feel the way they do or be as upset as they are. If you're on the left and you're seeing, videos of ICE like, breaking up families and, taking, mother from child. And, you feel like a lot of these people, they came from these horrible conditions, and you feel like, well, we live in the greatest country on earth, the richest country on earth. We have all this room. It's a giant country. Like, why isn't there room for these people? Why can't we help these people? Doesn't the Statue of Liberty say, bring you're tired and you're hungry and things like this? So,
Mhm.
they'll look at it that way and say, well, if you're a real patriot, well, then why don't you believe in those and those values and being the shining city on the hill, that the one that's capable of welcoming in all these people? And then they might even say things like, well, a lot of these countries are destroyed. A lot of it we had to do with it. The if you go to Syria and Afghanistan and Libya and some of these war-torn countries, a lot of it was as a direct result of European, American, NATO military interference that went in and destroyed these countries and leveled them and took away their ability to live normal, dignified human
Yes.
lives. And so like, well, why can't we help those people? Why shouldn't we help those people? But then if you're on the other side, if you're more of have a conservative temperament, you're gonna say things like, well, in England, there's something like 3,000 mosques now. And all these cities have Muslim mayors now. London
Hmm.
has a Muslim mayor. Sheffield has a Muslim mayor. Blackburn has a Muslim mayor. Birmingham has a Muslim mayor. And this is only like 10% of the population, which is already like a lot. It's England. It's very far away from the Middle East. That 10% is a lot. But still, for them to have so much political power, and then, you're going to see these stories about all the crime that's coming in and rape gangs and how, these people, they don't speak the same language as us and they're displacing us in our own homes. And this is being pushed by things like the European Union and, all these international agencies and countries in the EU, they'll have like quotas of amounts of migrants and refugees they have to take in. And if they don't take in that number of refugees or more, then they get fined. They face economic penalties for not taking in the amount of migrants that they're supposed to take in. And it's causing strife. Naturally, when you have people who have another religion, they speak another language, they have a different value system, they're different, right? They're different people with different values, and you ship them in by the millions into another country. There's going to be strife, there's going to be clashes, there's going to be hardship that comes as a result of that. And if you're conservative, you don't like that, right? You want law, you want order, you want a place where you feel like your people are prioritized over others. And you'll say, well, that's the point of a country. If a country doesn't prioritize its own people, then what's the point of having a country at all? Right? What's the point of having borders at all if they're not being respected, right? That's the point of having borders. And so, and both sides, there's points to be made about that.
There.
Those are valid concerns. It's valid to have compassion on these people who are being torn apart from their families, and it's valid to feel like your country should prioritize the needs of its people over other people, especially when these people coming in are often to the detriment of the way of life of your people. So I think it's important to kind of find common ground with both sides so that we can see that even when people get radical, they get violent, they get crazy, a lot of it does stem from a kernel of truth that they discovered. And then the media and all the sensationalism corrupted that and inflamed it, and it became what it is now. So I think that's kind of an important thing to remember as
Yes.
we're engaging with other people.
And I think it's really important what you were saying, people being shipped in, and there is intentionality. It's not like these
Right,
people are just, they're just such bad people trying to find a way in illegally. People are
right.
being trained how to do this and
Yeah,
given
yeah.
money and given the means to do this. There is something that's going on. We don't, I'm not,
Yeah, they're given cell phones, they're given maps.
yes,
They're sometimes they're given hotels and
yes,
to stay in. And like imagine if you're like, I don't know, like a French person or an English person and you're poor and you're struggling and you see these people from another country living for free in hotels and being given cell phones and all these things with your taxpayer money, like you're gonna feel like humiliated and angry and upset. Like, how dare they? Like, what about me? What about my family? What about my community?
Right.
Like, why don't they care? Why don't they care about me and my concerns?
Exactly.
Why is everyone in my government speaking Arabic now?
Yeah.
Why is the most popular children's name Mohammed in Britain? These are things that people think when they see these things. They feel humiliated and they feel angry, and it ends up bubbling up into, the escalating violence that we're starting to see.
Natalie, you had a experience when you went to visit another country and you ended up in Greece. You want to
Yeah,
share about that at all, or?
sure. Last year I went to Turkey, and while I was in Turkey, I was on the coast, the western coast of Turkey, and I decided to go to an island in a Greek island off of the coast of Turkey. So I took a boat over, and while I was there, I took a taxi ride around the island, and I asked the taxi driver to please just let me know what was going on with the climate and the just to describe the island to me in general. And while we were going around and seeing what there was to see, I noticed some Black people. Um, and not that would have been, I mean, if I would have been in the United States, I wouldn't have thought anything about it. But in Turkey and in Greece, I really didn't, or in the Greek islands, I really didn't see any Black people at all where I had been. And so, and these Black people were really, really dark. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Where are these people from?" And he said, "Well, we have a refugee camp on the island, and those people are from the refugee camp." And I said, "Well, how many people are on the refugee camp, are in the refugee camp?" And he said, "About 1,200." And I said, "I've maybe seen two or five Black people total. And I don't see them with the rest of the population." And he said, "No, we try and keep the refugee camp contained and out of the way, because when the refugee people come out, they are vandals and criminals." And I said, where do they come from?" And he told me someplace in Africa that the UN had been paying this particular island so much amount of money per month to house and feed and have this refugee camp. And at a certain point, they send the refugees on to other countries when the UN deems that it's time to send them on to other countries. And I said, "How do they interact with the population?" And he said, "Not very well. There's a lot of friction and a lot of crime." And it was the same situation. There was a Muslim culture, and the way of doing things was very different. And the people weren't being educated. They weren't being given a future or any type of opportunity in the island. And so they were, in essence, being held in a holding facility and getting out on occasion and then causing crime as they were out and interacting with the community. And I said to him, "Why doesn't the UN just repatriate these people to their country and pay their country these fees to build up the infrastructure of the country?" And he said, "That's a very good question. I don't know, but that's not how it's done." And the UN is increasing their fees. They are wanting to increase the fees and increase the accommodations, the facilities, as it were, for these people.
So it just goes to show that there are forces at work. There is intentionality. And so the issues that we're having with immigration, as you said, it's not simply as organic as it might seem to be. And there's something behind this. And so we do have to have compassion on the individuals. We have to have compassion on those who are being sent to these different countries. And we are all humans trying to survive and navigate through all this chaos and confusion. Natalie, I know you've been researching the history of immigration here in the United States, and maybe you can summarize what you've been learning about.
Sure. I'll just talk a little bit about some of my research. So, immigration in the United States has looked different over the past couple of hundred years. In the beginning, as you know, this land was not your land or my land. It belonged to the Native Americans, and everyone really came to this land as strangers, no matter where we came from. But how things got started, I suppose there were two groups of people: the Pilgrims, those that were escaping the tyranny of both England and other European places. There was the Anglican or the Protestant, the state Protestantism in England, where there was a lot of persecution, and in the other European countries, people were fleeing the tyranny of the Catholic Church. And so in the beginning, emigration, as it were, out of these countries to the United States looked like white Protestants fleeing to America. And that continued for quite some time. There were also prisoners, I believe, that the British countries were sending over to the United States as well. So America was from the beginning being populated and colonized by different people groups. As time went on and the colonies became a little bit more established, then there were calls for certain kind of immigrants to come to America, and some of those people would have been agrarian or peasant people. Wealthy people were not necessarily wanted in the United States because the community felt that the success of America depended on those who would come prepared to work and be prepared for hardship. And also, certain people groups within Europe were excluded and others were encouraged. So Northern and Western Europeans were included, and Southern and Eastern Europeans were excluded. So even though you could have been white, no matter what your race was not important, it was your religion. There was this idea that religion was very important in the United States. There was not a desire to bring people with tyrannical ideas. And we can see that being shaped in Massachusetts, who banned Jesuits, for example, from coming and colonizing the United States. I think there was another state, maybe it was New York. So that happened for a period of time, and that stretched over to the United States till probably the mid 1800s, when there was a national anti-Catholic sentiment that included both the Irish Catholic immigrants and also the Jesuits that were coming into the United States. In fact, we had a political party that was known as the Know Nothings political party that was dedicated to keeping Catholics out of the country because of the tyranny and the political intrigues that were waged and invade upon the population in other parts of the world.
Mm.
Specifically, the Jesuits had been responsible for so much political Machiavellianism that countries just outright banned them, and ours was not welcoming. So, for quite some time, that was the case. But then the states, as they continued to colonize and have certain people groups, they requested more types of their own people. And a lot of them continued to ban certain European groups. And then we got into, I think, maybe the late 1800s, when the states' rights or states' decisions for immigration was then ruled by the Supreme Court as being a federal issue.
Mm.
And when it became a federal issue, then certain legislators, certain men of power took position and said, we will now institute this reason or that reason. So
Mm.
one of those reasons happened to be the anti-Chinese immigration policy and anti-Asian policy for quite some time. That extended to all Asian groups except for the Japanese people and the Filipino people. And the reason the Filipino people were permitted in the United States was because that was a U.S. colony. And so those were viewed as U.S. Colonist citizens, as it were, in the
So
main.
was there a lot of Asian immigration happening prior to that ban?
There had been when the robber barons, you may be familiar with the robber barons of America, like the Mellons and Carnegie and all of
Okay, so this is with the railroads, right? The building
that
of the railroads.
are building the railroads. And so the Chinese people came over and helped to build the railroads. And to keep a matter of perspective, as it were. So something like in the 1880s, in the United States, maybe population was about 62 million United States people, and 3% of that would be Chinese people who came over, Asian people, to build the railroads. But after the railroads had been built, there was suddenly this sudden sentiment, we can't have these Asian people, these Chinese people over here because they're stealing American jobs. And I'm not sure what 3% of 62 million is, but that is not a lot comparatively speaking. And for those people to come over and build the railroads, do the dirtiest, hardest work, and then suddenly become a threat to economic prosperity wasn't really quite realistic, especially because American society at that time was still very agrarian or farm centered. But it was beginning to get into the Industrial Revolution.
Were they being encouraged to come in?
They were being encouraged for that period of time, yes. But then suddenly we had the anti-immigration clause, or the anti-Chinese
Interesting.
immigration clause, and then
It shows you the fickleness of our nature. And we see this happening too. It's like if it fits our needs, if it's convenient, then yes, we're all for it.
yep, and that turned around again because after the wave, the anti-Asian wave, we had something called, I believe, the Dillingham Commission in the early 1900s, where there was a massive report done. I think it was 41 volumes or around 1,000 pages on the different people groups that were populating the United States. And it was basically assessing the worthiness of these people groups as farmers. And the Chinese were viewed as the highest competency with farming, with orchard work and agriculture. They had the highest competency. They were assessed for whether they were people that came as a family group, which was viewed as stable, or people that came over as individuals, maybe people who were unstable, who needed to get into debt to then bring their family over to the United States. And would these people be a burden on society? And then this eventually turned into a report that the eugenicists used then to make public law known as the Johnson-Reed Act. And this act was legislation that basically struck fear into the heart of the eugenicists, who said, hey, we're having all these immigrants come over and we don't know that they're really worthy people. People that are worthy are maybe hard workers and competent people, but some of these people that are coming over, like Jews and Poles and Catholics, maybe some of them they're a threat to our national security. The Irish people aren't very good workers. They're just loafers and we don't like their religion. And so there was a lot of seizing of children at the ports of immigration of these different people groups, and then turning them over to insane asylums and because they were threatening national security. And there was a lot of, unfortunately, persecution and sterilization procedures and policies that were then acted upon against both American people and immigrant people who did not find or meet the ideals of the eugenicists, which ironically, Dr. Kellogg was a part of that movement. So that's a little embarrassing history of Seventh-day Adventism right there. But anyway.
Now, Natalie, you said the Johnson-Reed Act struck fear to the hearts of the eugenicists, but you don't mean that, right? You mean
Yes, all of the immigration from the different people groups that were viewed by the American people struck fear in the heart of the eugenicists. And then these eugenicists are like, we're having these waves and waves of incompetent, unworthy human beings. We had better limit the people groups that are coming into America. We'd better start working on sterilization policies. We'd better take action. And there was very persecutorial measures that followed as a result of this act and as a result of I think, the Dillingham Commission report. Let me just double check that is correct. I've called that correctly. So anyway.
the Immigration Act of 1924, that was?
I believe, yes, it was 1924, and yes, it was the Dillingham.
So this is very interesting. We see that history repeats. You were talking about there being a lot of seizing of children, sterilization, things being done to people against their wills. And we are seeing that again happening as a result of our immigration policies.
Yeah, and I think eventually this act was repealed as a eugenicist, how shall I say, a protective measure for the American, I should say, protective measure for the American people that was eventually repealed in 1965. But our immigration policy today reflects the template of allowing certain amounts of people from certain countries into the United States based on that template. The political reasons may be different, but we're having a policy, as it were, of excluding and permitting certain people groups into this country based on that template. And one of the things that I found interesting at that time was Mexicans were welcomed into the United States and valued as workers and as immigrants in the early 1900s, maybe 1930s. And that went on until the movie, I think, The Reefer Madness, when there was, you know about that movie, It Looks Like Davy. There was a popularization of the laziness of Black people and Mexican people from Reefer Madness based on the media, I guess, efforts of William Randall Hearst, who lost some lands to the Mexican over the Mexican-American War. So anyway, that's going down another track. But all of this to say that it's funny that now we don't want Mexicans, and then we did want Mexicans. And I think, going back to first level and second level thinking, the bottom line is, if you take a position that this is a threat to our national security but based on these reasons, or that is a threat based on these reasons, based on a partisan perspective, then we are really just pawns for whatever is a politically popular and expedient ideology based on our modern civilization. And we can look back on that and say, yes, that is true, or no, that is not true. We can look back and say, it's not true that eugenicist claims are valid. And look at the way we acted at that time. But now we're acting the very same way on both sides of the coin as we were back then. So I did want to finish, though, with a very interesting modern dilemma that we're having. So I'm not saying this to forward either side of the political coin, but I did want to point out that um, there is this thinking today that you were saying on the left, our US military policy has devastated these other countries, and so it's only natural that we should accept these emigres into our country and remediate the problems that we've inflicted on them. And on the other side, we have Republicans that are claiming, like the most notable Steve Bannon, who was Trump's chief strategist at a period of time. Let's see. He claimed that the Catholic Church is responsible for the global immigration situation or the United States immigration problems that we see today. That there are Catholic charities that are particularly responsible for allowing illegal immigrants into our country. And he said specifically that unable to really come to grips with the problems in the church, the Catholic Church needs illegal aliens. They need illegal aliens to fill the church, Bannon said in an interview with Charlie Rose that will air on 60 Minutes. And so the Catholic Church has an economic interest in unlimited immigration and specifically unlimited illegal immigration. And there was a Newsmax article that reported a similar sentiment, which is the Pope, more than anybody else, has driven the migrant crisis in Europe. And specifically, Cardinal Timothy Dolan in New York was responsible for the open border policy. And there are Catholic organizations that are behind this immigration in the United States or the illegal immigration. And so all of that to say that when we express an opinion, we are operating on a first level perspective, which is this should happen according to the Democratic perspective, or this should happen according to the worldview of the Republicans. And in fact, it is a really superficial conclusion to align with something that's happening on the obvious, because all sorts of things happen in the background that we as the little people are unaware of. We're agitating against forces that we have no idea about. We're agitating for policies that we don't know if they are righteous or unrighteous. For example, it's easy for me to look back 100 years ago and say, hey, those eugenic ideals were very, very crazy, and some horrible, inhumane things happened under those ideals. And yet, those ideals were presented to the American population as protecting them at the time, and they were very popular and accepted by people. So I think I was starting to say I'd do that quickly, and I ran off a little longer than I intended.
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was just so clear and so well stated. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from all of that. And I think that you brought to light a very important thing. Number one is that this subject of evolutionary thinking, of which eugenicism is a part of, that when it enters into our psyche, it will poison everything. And as you said, you said that the Johnson-Reed Act, it was in place for probably about 40 years or so, and then it was repealed. But typically what tends to happen once something enters into the books, it's allowed. This is a very terrible way of thinking, and it was allowed for a while, right? And then all of a sudden people seem to wake up and they're like, no, we don't want this, and they repeal it. It doesn't go away. It comes back hidden in another way. And I think that's a little even more dangerous because people think, oh, we no longer have this problem. We've solved it. Now we have a new administration, maybe, and this new administration is on the side of God and that type of thing. But the thing is, once this type of thing happens, uh, we don't go back. Satan does not give up ground. And so I remember hearing about eugenicism and how so many people were interested in eugenicism. And then when Margaret Sanger came on the scene, and then, now we have abortion, and now it's packaged into the rights of a woman. So
And
we
control, because out of the eugenicist movement, there was the population control and the idea that it would be okay to sterilize certain people groups.
I mean, but population control is not as well accepted as the civil rights issue.
Mhm.
People will live and die for the civil rights issue of a woman and the right that she has over her body. The population rights issue, it's kind of like eugenicism, where people, it's a little foreign. A lot of people haven't even heard about eugenicism, and they're not aware of the evolutionary backgrounds of it, or they're not aware of the spiritual beliefs behind it even. And I think that leads us to our third level of thinking, the whole spiritual aspect of this. Now that we have touched upon what it is, the first level subject matter that is dividing our country, like, and now we're talking about the second level aspect of it, the history behind it, who might be behind some of these things, and what is the intentionality behind it. Now we have to look at the third dimension of it. I, as a Christian, what am I going to do with all this information, and how do we solve this problem? Can we solve this problem of immigration?
I think from a Christian perspective, I think we have to look at maybe 2 points of view. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Deuteronomy, the blessings and cursings chapter, which is God said to the Israelites, I'm welcoming you into Canaan. I've given you this land. This is my land. I am now giving you this land. And when you are here, you will do well if you follow the principles and laws of righteousness. But if you don't, you are going to be in a position where you're going to be cursed. And so that's a really quick summary. And then to follow that up with Isaiah 117 or 1:7, that was some few hundred years later, some centuries later, when Isaiah is talking to the people of Israel, and he's describing a scene of really of utter desolation. And the cities are burned. There are foreign invaders consuming the country in front of the people's presence. And the verse Isaiah 1:7 says, your land is desolate and your cities are burned with fire. Your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers. And this is a very different contrast than, especially next to Deuteronomy, when God is saying, you will be blessed when you sit up, when you go out, your children will be blessed, your heritage will be blessed, everything, your land will be blessed, your agriculture will be blessed, your animals will be blessed. And now we're seeing this contrast that your country is desolate and your cities are burned with fire. And the question I think that Christians have to ask is there a reason why we are seeing our national security in a situation of compromise? And on one hand, I think we haven't really seen it yet. So there are these issues that we are seeing in other countries where there is terrible tumult and criminality against native populations by the foreigners. And we haven't seen that to the extent, but certainly the narrative is that it is here, it's a threat, it could happen at any time, we better do something about it. So I think there's an element that is agitating for that to occur, but also I think it's important to consider, are we in the stance of the Israelites that they are blessed by God, or at the beginning before they entered into Canaan, or are we in the stance of the Israelites when they were with the prophet Isaiah and he is telling them, look around at your situation. The reason that you're in the situation that you're in is because you don't have that abiding connection with God that you used to have.
Amen. I mean, that is something very much that we should consider. The thing is, though, we're not a theocracy, and we have certain constraints that I guess the Israelites didn't have. And so, what is there for us then?
Well,
You
it's
know,
true
how?
that we're, I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I think of course, it's true we're not a theocracy. Our Constitution makes the provision that we shall have no law respecting religion. So we are not a theocracy, but there is a large Christian base. We claim to be a nation of Christians. And so, as Christian people, are we going to receive the messaging from an administration that also claims to be Christian? Are we going to receive messaging that we have to take up arms to defend ourselves over some possible threat? Or are we going to receive messaging like, hey, we should step back and evaluate what's going on in our lives before we try and invade war upon each other and upon these strangers? I guess I'm maybe answering Davy's point, which talks about guarding the heart.
Because you
Before,
already know what Davey's going to say.
according to the last podcast, Davy's message is, if you're ever in an inflammatory political situation, instead of having a response, guard your heart. So I'm speaking to that, and I'll stop speaking in a moment. But my point is that since we are a predominantly Christian nation and we claim to have a Christian heritage, if we're having a matter of national threat and security, isn't it the case that every time there's a reason for us to seek God, we don't, in fact, take up arms against each other? We kind of stop our society a little bit, or at least our communities, and we say, hey, is there a reason why Christians are being invited to shoot each other and maybe get inflamed with each other? Or should we stop and seek God's face on an issue and say, hey, our nation is having a problem. Shouldn't we evaluate this on a spiritual? I think that would be the correct spiritual third level position to take, rather than a first level, I'm going to react and cancel somebody or call for them to be fired, or I'm
Right. Report somebody.
against someone. And I'll just stop there.
Well, thank you for that, Natalie. And David, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think, with a lot of these topics, just like the last one we talked about with Charlie Kirk, and this one's no different, where it's really inflammatory and it's really easy to pick a side, and you have to be like, like Daniel and Daniel's friends, and not to give in to the chaos and the whirlwind and the pressure of the crowd, because the majority is going to get swept away by sensationalism and inflamed emotions, and they're going to pick a side on one or the other. And you see everyone getting caught up in these issues, and how polarizing they are. I was just not that long ago, I think it's legal now in Poland for them to kill illegal immigrants if they catch them. crossing, that they can kill illegal immigrants. And a lot of people are like, yeah, like they get really gung ho about that. They get really excited about that. And then people on the other side, people on the left say, like, see, like, look how inhumane these people are. Look how barbaric these people are. These people are monsters. And then, you see all these things, and you see people who are bringing up like white grievance. White grievance has become like a really popular topic now. Like Steve Bannon that you brought up earlier, he's like a big mouthpiece for white grievance. And the problem is there's truth to these things, right? There's truth that there has been racism leveled against white people. There has a lot of the countries that have been targeted by these mass waves of migration are majority white countries. And so a lot of people who are white from European descent feel like they're being replaced in their own homes. And so you have these demagogues who come out and they champion white grievance, and they get a lot of people who before they never thought about race at all. Now they're really caught up in racial consciousness. They get really caught up in their tribe and their ethnicity and their race, and it's fomenting a race war. You're seeing these race wars happening in the streets of all these different places. You hear about it in France, you hear about it in the UK, you hear about it in places in the United States, and you see naturally things like that are very touchy, and you're being very pressed to pick a side, to get really excited and to get really angry at one side or the other, and to dehumanize the other side, and forget the shared humanity that you have with the people around you, and get really swept up in these issues. And the thing is, it's not just immigration. This is just one among many issues where this is happening over and over, and it's leading up to the bubbling cauldron that we see in these Western nations, where people the situation is getting more and more volatile, and people are getting more and more tempted to erupt into wide scale violence. And I think that's on purpose. I think that's all by design. I think that Satan is very much trying to push events to foment violence and to foment division and to foment hatred and to bring down as many people into hell with him. And I think that there's a lot of people who start off as well-meaning people. There's just like that book. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book. It's called Ordinary Men, but it's about how ordinary people got motivated to become Nazi officers and even participate in some of the atrocities that were committed during World War II. And it's about normal people, how just normal everyday people who go to work, have families, maybe they're religious, and then somehow, step by step, they start off normally, but step by step, they get radicalized and they get motivated to do things that just a couple years ago, they never would have seen themselves ever doing things like this before. And I think that that's a really relevant book right now, because you see more and more ordinary people getting radicalized by the events that we see today. And you see it especially with immigration. And because immigration, that goes to like the core of your identity, of your ethnicity, your nation, your race. This gets to really the core of how people identify themselves. And they feel like their very identity is being targeted and even wiped out in some situations. And of course, most people are going to get inflamed by that. Of course, there's going to be people who say, I want to fight back. I want to take my country back. I want to make America great again. I want my country. I want France or Britain or Germany to be a place for French, British, or German people. Like you're seeing all that, and you're going to continue to see all those things. So I think it's very, very important to not get swept up by all those things, to guard your heart against all these things, because really there's no political solutions to these things. I don't see any political solutions to these things. I think the only answer to all of these things are spiritual solutions. And I think that we have to make sure that we're fully in alignment with Christ, because you're going to get also swept away by people who proclaim Christ, right? You see, like you go online, you'll see the Department of Homeland Security posting Christ is King, as if the Department of Homeland Security embodies anything of the character of Christ, like the people who are in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, and you see the government trying to goad you into believing that they're acting in the name of God. And there's a lot of countries that do this. And you have to be very careful about that. You have to know your scripture. You have to know the Spirit of Christ. You have to be in the Word and you have to be prayerful, or else you too will be caught up in these things. You too will be deceived. You too will be swept up by these things, because the people who ended up doing the horrible things in World War II did not start off thinking that they would ever do something like that. You know, it was a step-by-step process. And so I think we need to be really careful about all those things.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, Alice Bailey wrote about the coming of the Christ. What was the name of her book? It was The Reappearance of the Christ. And so you don't even have to be a Christian, and you can talk about this Christ, and it's not the same Jesus Christ. So it's really interesting. There is an alternate gospel that the world has for us and that Satan has for us. And we have to sometimes, when we're going through confusing things, I think an easier way to make sense of things is to look at the fruit. And it's as you were saying, Davy, when you see even Christians jumping on each other's throats rather than turning their focus to Jesus and trying to see whose image is being formed, and what's the pattern that we're seeing here. We're seeing that Christians are being manipulated.
Hmm.
We're getting stuck in first level thinking, arguing about all of these things, which all have some truth to them. And yes, we should be caring and compassionate about what is happening. But we want to be very wise that we don't want to play into their hands here. And we have a role. We have a role here. As Seventh-day Adventists, we believe that we have been given the three angels' message to give to the world. And so, how do you see that happening amidst all this confusion with immigration and that kind of thing? What is it that we should be doing? How is this work going to go forward? Especially if Christians are stuck in these arguments.
The thing is that um, we have to make some really critical decisions to unplug from this constant stream of programming, as it were, that's happening, which we don't even think of as programming. But
Hmm.
sometimes if I get carried away with myself and I'm watching YouTube videos, for example, and I start thinking about them, I think, wow, my ideas about food, my ideas about justice, my ideas about everything are being informed by YouTube's version of the gospel, whatever that might be. And we know something crazy like there are 800 hours of video material that are being uploaded every couple of seconds or something like that to YouTube. And we are all, as it were, engineered to have YouTube knows our number, in other words. So we know that when we are caught up into a cycle, either a news cycle or entertainment cycle of videos or programming, whether it be on YouTube, Instagram, or any kind of feed, as it were, then our minds are being shaped to reflect an image of something. And so
Mm.
we cannot, our minds are being reshaped to reflect the image of YouTube or of Instagram or of Facebook. And sometimes I think it's really critical that we unplug from all of that, maybe even on a permanent basis.
Hmm.
We can't take a part of a mental communion, as it were, and not be shaped or affected by that. So, the way for us to be prepared to rise above these things, I think partially has to do with unplugging.
Okay, so unplugging is one first step. As you're speaking, I was thinking that maybe something else too is to, whenever we are tempted to respond to someone, to look at the emotion that it's causing you to feel And what is the thought that you're thinking? Why are you responding the way that you are? Are you responding the way that you are because of fear and anxiety about how what this person says is affecting you, your perceived safety, your family, this kind of thing? What is the emotion that is being tugged upon here? And I think that if we would just step back and understand that that is the intent, that your emotions are going to be drawn into something, that we can step back and ask the Lord to help us to understand, is the thought that I'm thinking, is this correct thinking? And if not, then what is the biblical promise that I have to claim? And how can I get my mind to be thinking straight and clear again? Because I don't want to be manipulated, because that is the very thing that the devil wants to do. He wants to deceive you. This manipulation is a part of the deception of the very elect. And so we want to keep our minds clear and at a very high level to be able to see truth. Okay. And so my contribution would be to step back and examine our hearts and our emotions. Davey, you have any other suggestions?
Um, I agree. I agree with those suggestions. Maybe I would just slightly add on to we should be more mindful about the way we speak with each other as Christians about these topics, because especially online, people can get in the mud. People can be like when they're behind a screen, because you're not face to face with that person. You can't see like their facial expressions when you hurt them, or sometimes you even take I forget that word. There's a German word for like when you enjoy like causing pain in another person. But
Hmm.
some people actually enjoy it because you feel like you won, or you like, oh, you scored points on some invisible argument scoreboard. And especially when you're online and people are liking your comment over theirs, you're like, oh, I won the argument. Like people really get caught up in this stuff. And I think it's Matthew 5:22 where it says, verily I say to you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause will be in danger of the judgment, and whosoever says to his brother Raka will be in danger of the council, and whosoever says to his brother you fool will be in danger of hellfire. So it's like it's really important, the way we speak to each other as Christians and the way we argue with each other when we're calling each other names and we're treating each other, like imbeciles or fools for having a different opinion. Like there's some serious spiritual ramifications for that, like that's sinful behavior that needs to be repented of. And if it's not like that could be a salvational issue if that goes on for long enough, like that's a really important thing. So we shouldn't be so flippant with our language and we shouldn't be so careless with our tongues because a lot of times we are. And a lot of especially online, whenever we have a level of anonymity, we're tempted to kind of be a lot more nasty or cutting than we might be in person. So I would add that to be very careful about the way we discuss these things because what spirit are we speaking it in? Are we speaking it through the spirit of Christ and the spirit of love? Or are we speaking it in a spirit of wrath and a satanic spirit? So I would just add on to that.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to add on to this too. The fourth element, because you were saying be aware of how you communicate with other people. The fourth element is that understand that you are being programmed. If we are participating in society at all, we are being programmed. And we have some idea of how the devil wants to program us by some of these dystopic novels that have been written, where Satan is telling you this is the direction that we're going to go. For instance, with 1984, is it there that we hear about newspeak, for instance,
Right.
where language all of a sudden doesn't make sense the way that it used to. It's like something that you thought this meant this, now it means this, right? And now it gets very, very confusing what people are trying to say because they say one thing and you hear another thing, right? And then you start questioning, am I saying the right thing? You might see me pausing and speaking really slow. I think a part of it is because I don't even know what's politically correct anymore. I don't know how people are going to perceive of what I say. And I'm a very sensitive person. And so it makes my brain have to work really hard. And so, as what I've noticed on social media is that I will say something, someone will perceive of it another way. And then you start questioning yourself. You're just wondering, like, am I crazy? And so I think the devil is trying to make sure that those of us who are seeking for truth, that we do feel gaslit, that we do start feeling this confusion, and that all of us are being programmed to think that it is okay to, we see Satan's methods and we think it's okay. We
Mhm.
we think that we think that a just society can be attained with cruelty.
Mm.
Mhm.
We think that health can be attained with uh, toxins and poisons. We have a very it's a way of thinking that doesn't make any sense. According to if I was a kid, I would be like, no, that makes absolutely no sense at all. It's nonsensical, but we are accepting these things because it's being fed to us and we're being programmed to think a certain way. And so just understand that for us to get to heaven, to see Jesus, to have that purity of heart and mind, we're going to have to unlearn a lot of what the world is trying to teach us. And if the more media that you watch, that you're being fed this kind of thinking, the more we interact with secular entertainment of any sort, the music, it's coming into our minds without us even being able to analyze whether it's correct or not. So it's really time for us to be very, very serious and intentional and prayerful. And it's going to take a lot of humility for us to make it through, a lot of being on our knees with the Lord, asking Him to search our hearts, see if there's any wicked way in us. So, thank you both very much for sharing. And I think that this has been so helpful, so valuable. And I hope that many people will be blessed because of it. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. I was glad to be a part of it.
Well, would you mind praying for us as we close then?
Sure. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the ability to have this discussion and share it with our audience. I pray that as we close this discussion, that we will learn to embody your spirit more fully, that we'll be mindful of the decisions that we make, of the way that we speak, of the things we interact with, and all the forces that are vying for us in one way or another to pull us away from you, because there's so many demonic forces out there that are trying to corrupt our spirits and damage our character and to take us away from the salvation that you've promised for us. And so I pray that we will learn to be more mindful of the things that we engage with and be more thoughtful about them as well. I pray that we will learn to have control over our emotions and not get swept away by one direction or the other, but we won't walk to the left or to the right, but we'll walk fully in alignment with you. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. I hope that those of you watching, that if it's been a blessing, that you will like, that you will share, that you'll subscribe. And we hope to see you again at the next podcast. God bless everybody. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I hope that you enjoy the program and that you will like and subscribe. Especially consider sharing with your friends if you found this information to be helpful. God bless, and we'll see you the next time.